given out in public, we will so do.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. Honorable Member, Mr. Figueroa.
Mr. Speaker, in light of the minister's utterances and him not being in a position at this present moment to inform the House, because the questions tie in with regards to missing persons, and it is self-evident based on the minister's own expressed view, he does not have the information to provide the House. So, with your guide, Mr. Speaker, I will reformat these questions for written responses.
Thank you, Honorable Member, and please let us also have that in writing. Thank you. Mr. Clerk.
Statements by ministers, including policy statements.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, fellow members of Parliament, Emancipation Day 2021 once again has allowed us to humbly reflect on the sacrifices of our ancestors and their astounding will and courage exhibited in their fight for freedom. The enslavement of Africans remains one of the most odious events of mankind's history, where millions of men, women, and children were enslaved and endured unimaginable acts of violence, oppression, and exploitation over 4 centuries. Through it all, the African peoples suffered not only a loss of freedom. Slavery captured them from their homes, families, and communities, and robbed millions of people of their culture, language, religion, and their identity. Mr. Speaker, the 1763 Berbice Rebellion remains the first rebellion recorded in this hemisphere, led by enslaved Africans who established a form of government for over a year until it was brutally put down by the Dutch colonizers. These and many other slave-led rebellions in Guyana and the British West Indies played a major role in the abolition of slavery. The enslavement of Africans and their descendants remain the worst crime against humanity, and hence the ongoing fight for an apology and reparations demands justice for the historical wrongdoings committed during slavery. This remains a stark reminder that grievous aspects of slavery hang unresolved many generations later. Even today, as the debates rage in the corridors of power at the United Nations. Mr. Speaker, despite the abolition of slavery, true emancipation remains with many challenges to be overcome as a result of the lingering aftermath of slavery. Globally, issues of racism and other social, political, and economic forms of discrimination remain in some places entrenched, particularly in territories where slavery reigned centuries ago. While solutions to these issues continue to be sought globally, regionally, and nationally, there are successful takeaways that emancipation has produced in our country. When we consider some of the deeper influences of emancipation, we need only look to the names and histories of several of Guyana's villages to be reminded of the village movement, which stands as living testimony to the determination and drive of our African brothers and sisters, who were resolute in their aim to make a home and own the land they occupied after they were freed, and to develop sustainable livelihoods for themselves and their families. Mr. Speaker, from 1839 to 1852, freed Africans had purchased 25 villages for over $1 million, money they had saved by the sweat of their brows and pooled together for the betterment of their people. Today, villages such as Victoria, Buxton, Litchfield, Golden Grove, Dartmouth, Queenstown, Bed of Wacton, Pleasance, Petershall, Farm, Garden of Eden, Danielstown, and Bushlot, and many more, all hold deep roots in the significance of freedom and ownership among the freed Africans. Mr. Speaker, no such similar movement occurred in other countries of collective purchases and development of communal land ownership. They established organized communities with schools, farms, housing, and churches after the proclamation of emancipation. These villages serve as a demonstration of their will to reclaim their identity, establish themselves as truly free, and an ultimate form of resistance for the inhumane treatment they had endured. But even more importantly, they were committed to development and progress. This resolve of our African forefathers is a worthwhile trait that we, as proud Guyanese, have embraced from generation to generation, regardless of ethnicity, religion, or class. Our national profile is one of hard work, perseverance, and tolerance. Most of our leaders, professionals, and businessmen have come from humble beginnings and have struggled individually to overcome and to achieve their dreams. In the midst of negativity that assails us from many quarters, we must give homage to our ancestors who came across the Middle Passage and made this their home. We must always stand together as a unified nation and a sovereign state, regardless of the circumstances. We must remember that our African brothers and sisters were able to achieve emancipation because they stood together as one. Mr. Speaker, unity, the concept of building one Guyana, is a message that has been reiterated by His Excellency, Dr. Mohamed Irfan Ali. And it underlies the core of every goal and every initiative of the PPPC administration. The PPPC administration is unshakable in its belief that our diversity, rather than being looked at as a negative, should be seen as a strength that binds us, and together we can stand as one nation and continue to build on the foundations that our forefathers have laid. Equally, Mr. Speaker, one Guyana means that your government has a duty to provide for all citizens within available means, and just as important, that we as citizens respect the differences and work towards building a harmonious, modern, and democratic society. Mr. Speaker, we are duty-bound by no less than the preamble of the Constitution of Guyana, which states, and I quote, "We proud heirs of the indomitable will of our forebears, in a spirit of reconciliation and cooperation, proclaim this Constitution in order to forge a system of governance that promotes concerted effort and broad-based participation in national decision-making in order to develop a viable economy and a harmonious community based on democratic values, social justice, fundamental human rights, and the rule of law," end of quote. Thus, Mr. Speaker, the principle of oneness is a critical premise of our Constitution, and its corollary, inclusionary democracy, is also enshrined in Article 13. Mr. Speaker, I have no doubt that our ancestors would have wholeheartedly supported these objectives, as these were fundamental to their calls for freedom. We in the PPPC administration are committed to ensure that our people are at the center of economic, social, cultural, and environmental policies as we seek to bring forth prosperity for all Guyanese. Mr. Speaker, and as we have not wasted time in demonstrating our commitment to these objectives with multiple programs at central, regional, and community levels, aimed at reducing poverty, removing draconian taxes from the backs of the people, improving people's quality of life, realizing dreams of working people for house lots, houses, scholarships, and equal access to health and education and developmental opportunities. Mr. Speaker, there should be no room nor tolerance for racial prejudice and discrimination in our midst. If we are to achieve one Guyana, there must be room for all, regardless of race, religion, class, gender, geographic location, language, disability, and sexual identity. Mr. Speaker, emancipation signifies the importance of perseverance, resilience, justice, and respect for human rights. These lessons we can continue to observe in our everyday lives as individuals and as a nation. Moreover, the lessons learned can help guide us as we strive to overcome other issues that plague us today. A global pandemic and a natural disaster by flooding, the likes of which Guyana has never seen before, has taught us that we must together persevere and be resilient in the face of major threats to our existence. Mr. Speaker, we are constantly reminded of the need to appreciate the freedom of our beliefs and respect for our differences in our multi-ethnic society in Guyana. Such freedoms and respect were rights fought for in the fight for emancipation and all the subsequent struggles for independence and democracy. Mr. Speaker, both as a government and as a nation, we must remember the strength that lies in our unity. For we are each other's business, we are each other's greatness, and we are each other's bond. In our rich tapestry of diversity, there is room for all to thrive. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, members of Parliament.
Thank you, Honorable Prime Minister. The Honorable Member and Minister, Madam Gail Teixeira.
Oh, sorry. A year ago, August the 2nd, 2020, in the downstairs lobby of this building, the 9th President of the 12th Parliament was sworn in within hours of the declaration of the election results, and after a 5-month wait, fraught with repeated attempts to assault democracy and the will of the people to choose the government of their choice. That afternoon, the cry across the country was resounding: democracy has prevailed. Ironic it is that all this took place a day after the 186th anniversary of emancipation, when the cries of freedom rang out across this land. August the 2nd, 2020 is a landmark day in our country's history. It will always be remembered as the day that democracy, the rule of law, and our one Guyana triumphed. At no time in our history was there such a combination of individuals, civil society bodies, the PPPC and the small parties and their supporters, the media and the regional and international organizations and individual nations that stood together to defeat the repeated efforts to hijack the elections and overthrow democracy, the Constitution, and the rule of law. Mr. Speaker, we were tested, and the resilience and discipline of our people, the strength of our Constitution, and the professionalism of the institutions of the judiciary and the security forces, despite many provocations and pressures, prevailed for the long 5 months. This mass awakening in defense of democracy, Mr. Speaker, bodes well for our young emerging nation. We promised on the election campaign and in our manifesto that we would put our country on the cusp of massive socioeconomic transformation that can take us to new heights of prosperity. Our government's commitment to attaining this promising future was immediately seen in the passing of the 330 billion emergency budget within 1 month of assuming office. We said then that our focus was on righting the economy and addressing the COVID-19 pandemic, which had been woefully handled. This was followed by a $383 billion budget less than 6 months later in 2021. Our focus has been on preparing the foundation for the expansion of the socioeconomic base of a modern Guyana. Catering for our citizens first and foremost, these budgets provided for tax relief, the stabilization of our economy, the restoration of critical programs and infrastructure works, and in doing so, creating jobs, and most pressingly, relief for our citizens in the amid the pandemic. And so, in the past year, the PPC administration stayed true to its promises and ensured that every initiative, every investment made to date has strategically been setting the stage for Guyana's development and improved quality of lives for our people. In 365 days, we have accomplished in 1 year what another government, who we all know about, could not do in its 5-year term of office. all of this has taken place in the midst of two major disasters, neither of our making, COVID-19 pandemic and the unprecedented flooding in the April, May, June in all 10 regions of Guyana. We did not create these challenges, but we confronted them. Measures to combat COVID-19 were of utmost priority. Urgent and large purchases of drugs and medical supplies in short supply across the country, including PPEs, COVID-19 testing reagents and equipment, and the procurement of vaccines, which were in short supply globally, especially for developing countries. We've updated the COVID-19 action plan while continuing to roll out the vaccines for the adult population and trying to reach the 80% adult coverage. Vaccines will be available to children between the ages of 12 and 18. Recognizing the devastating impact of COVID-19 on families and communities, the new government also introduced a 25,000 COVID-19 household relief grant to households across Guyana. And by the end of the second phase, more than $8 billion have been put into the hands of people across the country. And of course, this does not leave COVID relief hampers that were distributed to the poor and the vulnerable. Hundreds of millions have been spent to keep children in a learning environment as a result of COVID-19. On coming into office, the government sought to find new initiatives to help children remain in a learning environment with the use of the Learning Channel, printing of hundreds of thousands of workbooks and learning tools distributed to children across the country. The torrential April, May, June rainfall of 2021 caused massive flooding and severely affected more than 51,000 citizens countrywide. Considering this is the worst disaster Guyana has ever seen, the government responded with efficiency and alacrity and visibility, including the visibility of the highest post holder in our country, the President. Through the work of the Civil Defense Commission and other critical institutions, hundreds of persons were immediately evacuated and over 83,000 hampers of food and cleaning supplies were distributed to affected persons, and more are being distributed as people are in the recovery period. 23 billion in supplementary funding was obtained for relief measures, among which included allocations to support affecting households and farmers, including 7.5 billion, and repairing of infrastructure damaged by the nationwide flooding. In the midst of these unprecedented situations, the administration remained conscious of the need for reliable access to information for our citizens. From realizing the long-awaited liberalization of the telecommunications sector to reforming the government agencies and the implementation of ICT Access and e-Services project, which provides for 200 ICT hubs in the hinterland and riverine communities. Our government focuses on ensuring that our people are informed and therefore empowered. We have also created new opportunities for fiber optic cables, reduced cost of bandwidth, reduced cost of data, so that our ICT environment will also become competitive and more affordable to our people. Apart from these initiatives, the transformation seen under the PPC government within the last year alone is historic. In every sector, there's been transformative shifts for the better. Increased economic development, a revitalized health sector, resuscitation of the national housing drive, resuscitation of the sugar industry, job creating, mass investments in education through scholarships, grants, and loans, transformative infrastructure, investment in cheap and more reliable electricity, investments in youth development, investments in Amerindian communities, developments in the natural resources sector to secure our future as an oil and gas producing nation. Whilst the government has laid the foundation for the transformative agenda in its first year, we have also transferred billions of dollars directly to the people of Guyana. And maybe I will give some examples of a few initiatives, not all. One, we restored and increased the annual cash grants for Because We Care program and school uniforms as promised. $3.3 billion will go into the hands of parents of these children. And in fact, we have completed Region 2, Region 10, Region 9, and we are completing Region 3 and 4 right now. 2, commence the phased increase of old age pension by injecting an additional $4 billion annually in disposable income for senior citizens and reintroduce the water subsidy. 3, increase public assistance from $9,000 to $12,000 monthly, providing an additional $500 million in income support to beneficiaries. 4, reduce land rentals for farmers, releasing $1.4 billion annually back to the farmers. 5, reintroduce the year-end bonus for members of the disciplined forces, paying out more than $500 million to our men and women in uniform in the last budget. 6, launched a special one-off grant to frontline health workers to the tune of $3 billion. 7, remove the draconian APNU AFC taxes placed on the people of Guyana, including VAT on electricity, water, education, drugs, and medical supplies, basic wholesale necessities, data for residential and individual tax use, basic construction materials, and heavy equipment for industry. 8, made home ownership more affordable, restoring the $30 million ceiling on mortgage interest relief and increasing the ceiling on low-income housing loans from 8 to 12 million. 9, allocated $120 million for programs supporting the community of persons living with disabilities and a further $50 million to organizations working in victims of domestic violence. Strengthening the Amerindian village economy through the Economic Investment Fund, the transfer of funds to each of the 229 Amerindian communities across Guyana, totaling $1.732 billion, as well as the provision of tractors, ATVs, and other equipment to help in their economic advancement. These measures injected, notice I said injected, I didn't say we're doing it, they have been already injected, well over $50 billion into the economy, improving household disposable income, as well as injecting liquidity in the economy. Housing, critical to people's welfare. The government restored the housing program, and more than $14 billion has been invested. So far, the housing has processed almost 2,000 titles, transports, and commenced construction of almost 1,000 low, moderate, and young professional houses, and the process of designing and implementing infrastructure works to see the allocation of another 10,000 in the coming year. The government reinvested in sugar and reopened the industry, returned jobs, and brought back vibrancy to many communities. The conceptual planning for Wales development is in the final stage of completion. In addition, the government restored the Community Service Officer Program and 2,000 Amerindian jobs which were wiped out by the APNU AFC government in 2015. Various initiatives are in progress to restore Linden and the bauxite sector that also collapsed under the former government. A rapid expansion of Guyana's physical infrastructure has already been launched with the aim of improving our relations with our neighboring and trading countries, as well as expanding the economic space in which we operate, opening up new lands to unleash productive potential, improving internal connectivity to enhance citizen and commuter convenience. Maybe I should list some of the issues here. These include key projects that are already underway. So these are not dreams, these are not pieces of paper, these are things that are in progress, such as the Lethem to Linden Road, the Quarantine River Bridge in partnership with our Surinamese neighbors, enhancing private sector capacity to service the oil and gas, private sector investment to construct multiple shore-based and deep water facilities at the mouths of the Demerara and Berbice rivers, expansion of access to productive land for agriculture and other productive purposes has commenced. For example, the number 58 to Kanji Creek Road, Parika to Goshen Road, the Temeri to Bartica link, The new bridge across the Demerara River has already been tendered and is expected to open on, the tender is expected to open on October 3rd, 2021. The design of the new road from Shunad to Parika is in progress. The new highway from Eccles to Mandel is expected to be completed by year end. Design and costing is completed for the Eccles to Diamond Highway. Ogle to Eccles Highway is expected to be awarded by the end of this quarter. Efforts to secure financing for the Ogle to Diamond and from Diamond to Chimeri phases of this project have also commenced, with a feasibility study already completed. The rehabilitation of Suzdijk to Linden Highway has commenced. Right across the country in all 10 regions, there are works going on community, bridges, roads, streets, in residential areas and in farming areas. The city and country is alive. And one of course, the goals is the preparation of a work of a new city, which for now is called Silica City, is in the planning stage with surveys and land acquisition being pursued. Again, this is not a pipe dream, this is reality. In addition, investments have commenced that would see many new internationally branded hotels and modern health facilities coming on stream. There is no doubt that the physical landscape of our country is changing dramatically. In this endeavor, we have to deal with the energy sector and recognize the importance of this for the advancement of our economy and our society. The government has commenced investment in this sector, aiming for a new generation capacity of at least 500 megawatts in the immediate term, with the option to expand this further in the long term. Major initiatives in this sector will include gas to shore project terminating at the Wales Development Authority and a new power generation from the Amila Falls hydropower project, which, my dear friends in the Parliament, is back on the agenda after being sabotaged in 2014 by the then opposition, the APNU AFC. Work in all of these areas have commenced at various stages, and the final outcome would see energy costs being slashed by 50% before the end of 2024. I know some of these things are difficult to swallow because you know what you didn't do in 5 years. You didn't do. Preparing our resilience to disasters due to climate change in our geography, work will continue on reinforcing our sea and coastal defenses, including the construction of 3 new major outfalls similar to the Hope Canal, 1 in each of the regions 3, 5, and 6. Planning is commenced on a massive project to relieve South Georgetown from flooding with the construction of a new drainage system and other infrastructure to facilitate this time. Also, other areas of the city will also come under examination for reducing flooding. This is within the context of expanded low carbon development strategy, which you abandon also, which will go through a consultative process as with the original LCDS in 2010, which of course the green development strategy, no one ever saw the document at all. We don't know what it said. It will focus on ensuring that our vast standing forest resource is adequately remunerated for the global climate service it is providing, as well as ensuring that the vast potential of the blue economy is harnessed for national development. In order to prepare the country for its economic takeoff, requires critical investment in our human resources. In order to ensure that every single Guyanese of employable age is adequately equipped to obtain gainful employment, a vast transformation of our human resources will be imperative. And therefore, here are some new initiatives that we introduced and are already in train. 20,000 online scholarships, gold scholarships, over the next 5 years, with the first batch of 6,000 Guyanese emanating from all 10 regions, emphasis all 10 regions, being awarded before the end of this year. Rapid training of at least 3,000 Guyanese to work in the expanding hospitality and tourism sector in anticipation of the new hotels. Strengthening technical and vocational education and promoting on-the-job training through apprenticeships. Recognizing that women face additional burdens, Programs such as WIN and GWLI focuses on training women and developing entrepreneurial skills and hopefully new businesses with women leading it. Discussions are in the final stage towards the establishment of a world-class oil and gas institute to serve as a center of excellence for training of personnel for the oil and gas sector in Guyana, regionally and worldwide. With regard to the security sector, the government has already commenced a program that will see the modernization of the sector, improvement of the welfare and working conditions of those in the sector, and institutional strengthening to aid transparency, efficiency, and accountability have already begun. Work has commenced on the building of 3 new prison blocks that will house 900 prisoners in Lusingnam, and the resourcing of equipment to enhance the capabilities of crime fighters. Through this rapid transformation that the country is witnessing, the government is committed to ensure that no one is left behind and that social welfare continues to be improved, that no one has been discriminated against in accessing all the goods and services we have offered in this last year. Reducing the cost of bureaucracy and red tape, as well as reduce the hurdles people have to go through to carry out their daily business with government agencies, are critical. Hence, a number of amendments to legislation are before the House to assist our citizens in this regard. It is anticipated that this National Assembly, which will celebrate its first anniversary on September the 1st, and Mr. Speaker, you will celebrate your first anniversary of being elected as Speaker of the 12th Parliament, this Parliament will be called on to address important legislative and institutional reforms to support the development aspirations of a modern Guyana and make One Guyana a reality. The establishment of the Law Reform Commission years after it was enacted in this House, and greater involvement and participation through parliamentary committees and broad-based consultations with the citizens and civil society organizations will enhance the inclusionary democracy as provided for in our Constitution. As part of our governance architecture, our institutions will also be strengthened and ensure accountability and transparent stewardship of our national patrimony and the taxpayers' money. The foundation has been laid for a rapid takeoff in 1 year. This country is alive and buzzing. We have only just begun. We have only just begun in 365 days. I call on the members of Parliament on the other side on this, our first anniversary, to join us in transforming our nation for the benefit of all our people in Guyana. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. The Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Sorry, Mr. Clerk. Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to join with you and the Honorable Prime Minister in extending emancipation greetings to all of Guyana. I really wish that all of Guyana could have heard the Prime Minister in his speech about oneness and all of what is going to happen in the communities. Mr. Speaker, on Sunday we marked the 183rd anniversary of emancipation from slavery. At this moment, let us reflect on the heroism, inspired courage, resilience, and the indomitable will of our foreparents who fought against the world's worst recorded evil acts perpetrated on a people for centuries. It should be recognized, Mr. Speaker, that our ancestors suffered the greatest indignities ever meted out to any set of human beings. But despite that, they never lost their desire to be free, their desire to be agents of their own cause and controllers of their destiny. This emancipation, Mr. Speaker, that we celebrated on the 1st of August is the end product of a people who stood resolute in their fight against the humanizing treatment and oppression of slavery and colonialism for the God-given right to be free, for freedom, justice, and human rights. In Guyana, it was the boldness and fortitude of our national hero, Kofi, the revolt for freedom that illuminated and laid the path we now endeavor and continue to trod for the attainment of total independence. Their collective fight for emancipation laid the foundation for political, economic, and social change that transformed the plantation to a nation. Today we live in a country under a regime that assures and promotes lifelong insecurities for the majority of our people. Their open oppression goes beyond discrimination, injustices, and economic marginalization. It is oppression with authoritarianism attributes that threatens our liberties and our democratic society. Most have agreed and accepted the view that slavery was the worst system of discrimination, intolerance, economic marginalization, and blatant disrespect for human rights, freedom of expression as well. This is what our foreparents fought for. This is what they fought against so that we can enjoy true freedom. I say to us that the spirit of our ancestors who deliberately fought and revolted against the vestiges of that evil system is embedded in our DNA. We therefore owe it to ourselves, to our forebearers and our future generations to fight for Guyana, to fight against today's modern and contemporary challenges we are experiencing by this PPP regime. Crime, violence, economic discrimination, policy-driven racism.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition, I ask you to stick to the personal explanation. Thank you.
To all Guyanese at home and abroad, as we observe and celebrate emancipation, we all must recognize that the fight to achieve an emancipated people is to unshackle our minds from mental slavery. Let us also recognize that the success of our ancestors gaining their freedom was a result of unity, the strength of pulling together our people for the common good. We must recognize that division and conflict were the elements that built and sustained the evil system of slavery. Its defeat, however, was realized with a unity of thought, effort, and the resolve of a people who consciously decided to come together and unite to defeat the system of slavery and oppression. Let us celebrate today, knowing that the fight continues for our people to be emancipated physically, mentally, spiritually, and economically. I thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Honorable Leader of the Opposition. Mr. Clerk,
Request for leave to move the adjournment of the National Assembly on definite matters of urgent public importance. Motions relating to the business or sittings of the National Assembly and moved by a minister. Introduction of bills.
the Honorable Minister of Natural Resources.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to present to the National Assembly the Petroleum Exploration and Production Amendment Bill 2021, Bill number 14 of 2021. A bill institute an act to amend the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act, and I move that the bill be read before its time. Thank you.
Let the bill be read the first time.
Petroleum Exploration and Production Amendment Bill 2021, Bill number 14 of 2021. Public business, government's business.
Honorable members, we will now proceed with the second reading of the Adoption of Children Amendment Bill 2021, Bill number 3 of 2021, published on the 11th of February 2021. Honorable Minister of Human Services and Social Security.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the adoption of Children Amendment Bill 2021, Bill number 3 of 2021, published on the 11th of February 2021, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, there is also an amendment to this which will be dealt with at an appropriate time. Before I move on, I would like to bring the attention of members to an error in the explanatory memorandum that you may have in your possession. As you remember, this bill came to the House in November of 2020. It was recalled and a new bill resubmitted in February of 2021. Unfortunately, the explanatory memorandum to accompany this has not been submitted. So that being said, I now move on to giving you the merits of this bill. The purpose of this bill is to amend the Adoption of Children Act, Chapter 4604, to give the Hague Convention of 29th May 1993 on the protection of children and cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption the force of law in Guyana. Adoption is permanent and legal, and it's a procedure which transfers all the rights and responsibilities of parenting to the adoptive parent. It is well recognized globally and nationally that children benefit from stability of family. They are better motivated, they're nurtured, they're encouraged, and they're able to develop in a healthy and a happy manner. So when we think of adoption, it provides this to children who are considered adoptable and require that permanent home. The amendment of this bill will allow the establishment of common practice and procedures that will harmonize the individualized regime which governs our country's inter-country adoption with other countries that are party to the Hague Conventions, sections to which I will refer. In other words, there is recognition by me being here and speaking on this that Guyana, like many other countries, has its own adoption laws. And by bringing it into conformity with the Hague Convention on Protection of Children and Cooperation Respect of Inter-Country Adoption, we seek to harmonize this practice.
The function of the 1996 Hague Convention is to avoid legal and administrative conflicts and to build a structure for effective international cooperation in child protection matters between different legal systems. In this respect, the Convention provides a remarkable opportunity for the building of bridges between legal systems having diverse cultural and religious backgrounds. It also avoids having to redo the entire process in each convention-compliant country. In other words, recognition is given to the process, central and competent authorities, and the certificates generated. Now, the adoption process in Guyana is governed by the adoption of the Children Act, Chapter 4604. An amendment to the Act passed in the National Assembly on December 13, 1997, made provision for overseas-based Guyanese and non-nationals to adopt children in Guyana. Under the existing legislation that governs inter-country adoption, I would like to give you a little snapshot of what happened between the years 2013 and 2020. The total number of children adopted by both non-Guyanese and overseas-based Guyanese during that time was 247. A total of 192 children were adopted by overseas-based Guyanese, and a total of 55 children were adopted by non-Guyanese. The highest rates of international adoption by non-Guyanese occurred in 2014 and 2018, with 22% of children being adopted in 2014 and the same in 2018. Similarly, the highest rates of international adoption by overseas-based Guyanese occurred in 2014, with 29% of children adopted that year, while in 2013 and 2018, the second highest rates of adoption occurred, recording an 18% of that adoption rate. At present, no international adoptions are proceeding, and these will resume after the passage of this bill with the support of members in this House. One of the most important developments in international adoption law and practice has been the promulgation of the 1993 Hague Convention on Protection of Children and Cooperation in Respect of Inter-Country Adoption, generally known as the Hague Convention on Inter-Country Adoption. Mr. Speaker, the Convention establishes international standards of practice for inter-country adoptions, which is defined as the placement for purposes of adoption of a child habitually resident in one country in the permanent care of a person habitually resident in another country. The Convention aims at creating the right condition under which adoption may take place across borders. We all know that nothing compares to the selfless act of responsible adults taking into their homes a child or children as members of their own families, to nurture, to love, and to protect, and to do so until that child or children attains adulthood. Inter-country adoption is usually a humane commitment to children, and it espouses service and love. But we well know that even every well-intentioned legal process like adoption can be manipulated, abused, or exploited by profiteers willing to sell children, unscrupulous persons willing to buy children, and adults seeking to obtain children for baseless or selfish reasons, such as sexual, labor, and criminal exploitation. During the adoption process, violations of the most basic rights of children can occur. These violations are often perpetrated under the cover of supposedly humanitarian acts and justified by the simplistic view that a child might be better off in a materially rich country. So illegal acts and malpractice can involve criminal networks and sometimes people with accomplices are prepared to carry out these acts. And sometimes others simply ignore these abuses in order to secure an adoption. The diversity of the methods used and the wide range of actors that must play a role in this process of which I speak demonstrates the vastness of the task at hand of protecting the rights of children in inter-country adoption. When we refer to the convention, we do so knowing that enshrined within that convention are safeguards to prevent all of the atrocities of which I spoke of, notably abduction, sale, and trafficking under the guise of adoption. These measures will not only protect the child, but it protects the families of the birth families of that child or children from exploitation, undue pressure, ensuring too that only children in need of a family are adoptable and adopted, preventing improper financial gain and corruption, regulating agencies and individuals involved in adoptions by accrediting them in accordance with convention standards. Overall, we can say that this protects children and their families against the risks of illegal, irregular, premature, or ill-prepared adoptions abroad. This convention is important as it advances a system in which all of the contracting states work together to ensure the protection of children. Cooperation between contracting states is essential to ensure the effectiveness of any safeguards put in place. And the very crucial point to take away from this is that the principle is implemented through international cooperation between authorities in origin and receiving countries under international best practices to protect against all of the abuses in relation to adoption. Guyana acceded to the Convention on the Protection of Children and Cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption on February the 5th, 2019. The convention entered into force for Guyana on May 1st, 2019. As such, Guyana became the 100th contracting party to this convention. The Hague Convention on Protection of Children and Cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption, the convention of which I speak, establishes uniform standards and procedures for the international adoption of children. In order to implement the provisions of the convention, Guyana is required to enact domestic legislation to fulfill the treaty requirements. Countries that become parties to the Hague Convention are required to adopt procedures, typically by implementing legislation to comply with the Hague Convention's obligations and requirements. Our task here is simple: to support this so that international adoptions can progress. Our existing legislation is comprehensive and already provides for many of the requirements and standards enshrined in the Convention. Therefore, amending the Adoption of Children Act, Chapter 4604, would implement specific requirements of the Hague Convention on protection of children and cooperation in respect to inter-country adoption. The amendment and subsequent passage of this bill will give the Hague Convention on protection of children and cooperation in respect of inter-country adoption the force of the law in Guyana. Now, it is not a willy-nilly arrangement. Within all of this, we recognize subsidiarity, which in the Convention means that contracting states must recognize that the child should be raised by his or her birth family or extended family wherever possible. If this is not possible, nor it is practicable, Other forms of permanent care in the state of origin should be considered. Only after due consideration has been given to national solutions should inter-country adoption be considered, and then only if it is in the child's best interest. And that is paramount in all of this, the child's best interests. The fundamental principle of the child's best interest guides the development of an integrated national child care and protection system, of which one part may be an ethical, child-centered approach to inter-country adoption, which is further strengthened by the Hague Convention harmonization, which we want to achieve. The Convention seeks to do many things, and as you read the amended bill, which is before you, you will also appreciate, if you read the bill in its entirety, there are many safeguards, such as ensuring that information is preserved as it relates to the child's parents, and also the prospective adoptive parent should be thoroughly evaluated, and we are ensuring too that every conceivable thing that needs to be done to ensure that the child is protected from the ills and abuses, those things must be dealt with within this bill. Now, within the bill, if there are inconsistencies between the provisions of the Convention and the operation of any other law other than the Constitution, the provisions of the Conventions shall prevail. This is 35B2, and this is important because it removes any kinds of tangle that can arise between or among different laws that are within specific countries. In other words, it creates an environment so that the convention be recognized, so people will not have to do and redo from country to country. Clause 2 of the bill provides for the insertion of Part 4A in the Principal Act. This is the provisions procedurally related to inter-country adoption. It necessitates that the convention have the force of the law in Guyana and designates the central authority and the extent of its functions in accordance with the convention. The central authorities mentioned reinforce the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child, Article 21, and seeks to ensure that inter-country adoptions are always made in the best interest of children and with respect for their fundamental rights. Central authorities also have specific obligations in respect of individual adoptions, inclusive of determining the eligibility and suitability of the applicant to adopt. A pivotal function of the central authority is its power to accredit bodies to provide inter-country adoptions. However, the process of accreditation of bodies is one of the Convention's safeguards to protect children in this adoption process. Any private adoption body or agency must be accountable to a supervising or accrediting authority. The Convention requires that only competent authorities should perform the Convention function. And if you would look at the amendment that you have, by substituting for Section 35C, for the purposes of discharging the duties imposed by the Convention, the Minister shall by order establish the central authority or designate an entity to carry out the functions of the central authority. That's the amendment to which I referred earlier when I began. Part 4A also sets out the procedural requirements for adoption of a child from Guyana by a person in a convention country. The benefit being that once the process is enacted and complete, it is recognized by both contracting states and adhered to. It further sets out provisions for the recognition of an adoption certificate from a convention country. The Convention establishes a system of automatic recognition of adoptions made in accordance with the Convention. Every adoption certified to be made in accordance with the Convention is recognized by operation of law in all other contracting parties. This means that the Convention gives immediate certainty in relation to the status of the child and eliminates the need for a procedure of recognition of adoption decisions or readoption in the receiving country. And this is a very good thing for bringing this and giving it the force of law. The automatic recognition is facilitated by the use of a model form for the Article 23 certificate, which attests the conformity of an inter-country adoption with the Convention requirements. However, there are still more protective mechanisms, as the central authority is empowered to apply to the court for refusal to recognize an adoption. It provides that the court may in such instances review the application and make a declaration if it is satisfied that the adoption is manifestly contrary to public policy, taking into account again the best interests of the child. This part empowers the central authority to apply to the court for an order that the pre-existing legal parent-child relationship be terminated. Further, the central authority is required to maintain a convention database which shall be kept confidential. Now, if we move further, Clause 3 of the bill provides for an amendment to the Principal Act. The amendment allows for the substitution for the word schedule, the words first schedule, wherever it appears throughout the Act. Clause 4 of the bill provides for the insertion of a new second schedule into the Principal Act, which sets out the text of the Convention. I hope, members of the House on both sides, you see the arguments for this movement, and it is necessary from a practical purpose or point of view to ensure that this proceeds so that we can once again resume international adoptions. And why I say practical, because there is a list of children up for international adoptions, and if their age goes beyond 18, then they are no longer able to be adopted. And that's an important thing, because if they are not allowed to be adopted, they will lose any benefits that they can derive through the adoption process. So I urge that this bill be supported with a clear understanding of the benefits to children who are adoptable, and also that with this harmonizing of our law and that of the Hague Convention, we are ensuring that the process safeguards one, and two, it's a process that does not have to be replicated from country to country. Those are the two main benefits of doing it this way and asking for your support. I'm sure my colleagues will have more to add, and I thank you, Mr. Speaker, at this point.
Thank you, Honorable Minister. I now call on the Honorable Member, Ms. Natasha Singh Lewis, to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I rise to add my contribution to Bill number 3 of 2021, the Adoption of Children Amendment Bill. Mr. Speaker, did you know that child adoption is permissible in Islam? Actually, it's a process that is encouraged, especially if there's a need in our society. One significant difference, however, in the process is that the child's surname does not change, and that it simply is because of lineage, and so to avoid brothers and sisters getting married to each other later in their lives. The matter of adoption I have traced back to the days of Musa alayhi salam, or Prophet Moses, as most of us know, was adopted by Lady Asiya, the wife of Pharaoh. This means, Mr. Speaker, that adoption of children is an acceptable practice even before all of us here in this room was born. Mr. Speaker, permit me to put on record from the onset the contributions here this morning. It has its genesis way back in 2019 in the form of Bill number 10 of 2019, and then later Bill number 15 of 2020. For many reasons, including the derailing of democracy through non-attendance of the opposition then, the PPP, to attend to the business of the House then, this Bill 10 of 2019 was not discussed in this House, but later found itself here as Bill number 15 of 2020 for its first reading, and last year it was then being recalled. I can only imagine this was a tactic to give someone else a consultancy, but nevertheless, Mr. Speaker, I wish to put on record that this bill, save and except a few changes made recently, is the intention and deliberate hard work of the David Granger administration. Mr. Speaker, I acknowledge the Honorable Minister speaking to the convention itself and the safeguards. I really do appreciate that. But Mr. Speaker, I want to speak to the process that led us here. Mr. Speaker, a great deal of work was done to produce this bill. Work done by the coalition government, and it must be noted and recorded. It's a reflection of our vision and commitment to protect and safeguard our children. And so to ensure their safety is their safety is and will always be the APNU-AFC priority. I am happy that the minister has committed to completing this part of the work to benefit the people of Guyana. Mr. Speaker, the work started since July 2016, just a few months after we came into office, when Guyana hosted a team of 118 participants from 25 states and overseas territories. They met right here in Georgetown and discussed the work of the Hague Conference on Private International Law, the HCCH, and the opportunities to collaborate in relation to its core conventions and instruments to Guyana. The Hague Adoptive Convention, which is the primary purpose to effect the amendment in this matter, is the major multilateral instrument regulating international adoption and calls for the need for coordination and direct cooperation between countries to ensure that appropriate safeguards are respected. And we've heard a lot from the minister on that. And I do support the safeguards in this case, even though I believe much more could have been done at this time. Further, the purpose of the amendment is to give force to law to the Hague Convention on the protection of children and cooperation in respect to intercountry adoption. This is dated May 29, 1993. Sir, the APNU-AFC coalition government supports this action. But Mr. Speaker, when we speak of people who are mentally lazy, this is an ideal situation to refer to. This convention is dated May of 1993. The installed government then, the PPPC, did nothing for 22 years. So 1993 to 2015 when they left office, they did absolutely nothing in relation to this convention. Sir, it is the APNU-AFC who picked it up within the first year of being in office and started the groundwork. Sir, the Honorable Minister Prasad, who would not tell us that all those years her party was in government and they did absolutely nothing. It is a shame. Sir, the real work started under the coalition government in 2016, July, when the APNU-AFC government hosted the conference whereby ministers of legal affairs, judges, NGOs, academias, representatives of CARICOM, and ATCH, and much more attended. Instead, sir, I observed a few months ago, I believe it was the latter part of 2020, that the Minister of Human Services and Social Security, in an interview with DPI, said that the government halted international adoption because Guyana was not complying with its obligations as a signatory to the Hague Convention. Sir, chronologically, as I've stated before, it is the PPP that is responsible for such a situation. It is the APNU-AFC who started the process given the first opportunity in office. Mr. Speaker, we should never, Mr. Speaker, the politicking the children's affair is shameless, and we should never seek to do that. And sir, I would just say that who makes such utterances is just a reflection of how limited they are in pulling such a political stunt, brandishing such untruth. But it is this House that we come to present the truth, and the APNU-AFC will always present the truth. Mr. Speaker, let me share with you that the adoption of the international experts on this matter is and what they have said about Guyana. The HCCC representative, Ignacio Gochia, said, and I quote, "The implementation of the HCCH Child Protection Convention and the Convention of the Rights of the Child is no easy task, but Guyana has made remarkable progress since 2016. Sir, this is not a quote from Shara Duncan or Christopher Jones or the APNU-AFC. It is testimony of the HCCH representative. Sir, Guyana deposited the instrument of accession in February 2019 and was entered into force in June 2019, a period of vision and stewardship by the David Granger administration. Mr. Speaker, the said HCCH representative said, and I quote, "Guyana is somehow leading by example in this continent as the first country to sign all 4 conventions." He said the HCCH family is eagerly working with Guyana to ensure implementation of the Child Protection Conventions in a systematic manner. For this, sir, we must give due recognition if we are professionals. And here I say, kudos to the APNU AFC for taking it this far. Sir, not so long ago, the UNICEF representative iterated while noting that the journey started 4 years ago, referring to July 2016. At the time of the report, and Guyana is the first state in the Americas to be party to the HCCH Children's Conventions, namely adoption, abduction, child protection, and child support. Sir, while much work was continuously being done from 2016, the opening of the Stop Taking meeting on the HCCH Convention in Georgetown, the HCCH and UNICEF highlighted the fact that Guyana is the first state of America to be a party. Sir, I say congratulations to Joseph Harmon for encouraging the then Minister of Legal Affairs to continue his hard work. Mr. Speaker, Guyana should know that we are the 100th nation to become a party to the Hague Adoption Convention. Thank you, APNU AFC. Mr. Speaker, I have said that this convention dated 1993 and that it is the APNU AFC that gave it life in July 2016. Through due diligence and hard work, and I'm grateful that Honorable Minister Vindi Prasad saw it fit to complete that process, which is to bring it here for the blessings of this House. The affairs of our children in Guyana should always be first and supported in the best way possible. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Honorable Member and Minister, Ms. Sonia Parag.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to make the first point of categorically stating that Bill number 3 of 2021, the adoption bill, has been tabled not for political purposes, but in the best interest of our children. But, Mr. Speaker, I totally understand that the opposition has to politicize everything because there is nothing else on merit to go on. Mr. Speaker, Bill number 3 of 2021 seeks to amend the Principal Adoption Act of Guyana, Chapter 4604, to now include a new part, that is, Part 4, and commencing from Section 35. Mr. Speaker, my predecessor and speaker just now from the opposition stated that the APNU AFC did all of the foundation work. But Mr. Speaker, I want to let the public know at this point in time that Guyana has had in effect in 2009 and amended in 2011 an adoption act that encompasses our laws and a legislation that gives coverage to adoption. And it is not from thin air that this amendment is being made, but on the foundation of the Adoption Act, which, Mr. Speaker, in 2009 and 2011, the PPPC was in government. Mr. Speaker, it goes without saying that every child should be brought up in an environment that fosters love, happiness, and core family values. Oftentimes, that is not the reality. Mr. Speaker, Guyana is the 100th country to sign on to the Hague Convention on the protection of children and cooperation in respect of intercountry adoption, which is essentially an international agreement to safeguard intercountry adoptions of children. So, Mr. Speaker, this bill today that is being read for a second time, it is really to bring the Hague Convention, or this specific Hague Convention, into conformity and give it the force of law. The proposed amendment with the insertion of this new part will give the force of law and therefore will conform to the terms of the convention with respect to the adoption of a child who habitually resides in one contracted state by an individual or individuals habitually resident in another contracted state. Mr. Speaker, across the borders you can have adoption being taken place, and that is absolutely legal. However, with the Hague Convention, because of what has transpired over the years, the convention has put certain safeguards into writing and has made it so compact that countries who are signatory to the convention gives a better protection for a child who is being adopted across borders. This brings me, Mr. Speaker, to the question, why is this amendment necessary for Guyana? The state of affairs at the moment in Guyana is that most intercountry adoptions occur within the United States of America and Canada, who are both signatories to the Hague Convention on Protection of Children and Cooperation in respect of intercountry adoption. However, without the codification of the Hague terms into our laws, it is highly unlikely that a contracted state will engage Guyana on such adoption. And Mr. Speaker, the honorable member stated that all of that groundwork and so on was being done. But what my friend didn't state is that adoptions, intercountry adoptions, were being routinely carried out without the force of the Hague Convention being in the force of law, up to 2020 when the PPPT took office. If I am not clearly understood, the Hague Convention was not given the force of law. Children were not given that protection of across the borders adoption. So although the intention might have been there, Mr. Speaker, adoptions were still being carried out without that protection. So, Mr. Speaker, this is the position now. Every prospective child who cannot suitably be adopted by persons in Guyana, but may have a better chance to be adopted by a resident of a ratifying state, will be at a disadvantage. And as it stands now, each prospective child is at a disadvantage. You see, Mr. Speaker, the aim of this specific convention is to protect or safeguard the children and their families from sale, trafficking, abduction, and ill-intended adoptions, which will violate a child's fundamental rights. This convention must have had to take root because of the occurrence of such unfortunate and horrible acts. And I am most certain, absolutely certain, Mr. Speaker, that that is exactly why the convention was established. The core belief of the Hague Convention is that the child's birth family or extended family should be the nurturers. If this is absolutely not possible, then any other form of care in the child's resident country must be next considered. Failing which, and only then, an intercountry adoption becomes an option. So the very natural processes must be explored before inter-country adoption is considered. Guyana, and Mr. Speaker, this is where the Hague Convention gives full coverage. Guyana should be no exception to something that ensures the rights of a child is protected and safeguarded, because the child's best interest must be of paramount consideration. Mr. Speaker, as far as possible, local and international bodies must develop mechanisms to protect families and their children. Legislation is one such system which can crystallize terms of agreements into law and give the necessary force and consequences intended by such terms. Articles 1 to 47 of the Convention, included herein and referred to as the second schedule, sets out in great and precise detail the process and circumstances to be employed in the adoption of children from one ratifying country to the other. The drafters, it would appear, carefully consider the process so as to include and give coverage to every possible scenario in the adoption process while simultaneously safeguarding a child's right. Mr. Speaker, permit me to read very short, brief reading of Article 1, which is the scope of the Convention. The objects of the present Convention are to establish safeguards to ensure that inter-country adoptions take place in the best interest of the child and with respect for his or her fundamental rights as recognized in international law. To establish a system of cooperation amongst contracting states to ensure that those safeguards are respected and thereby prevent the abduction, the sale of, or traffic in children. And finally, to secure the recognition in contracting states of adoptions made in accordance with the Convention. So, Mr. Speaker, there are many articles in this particular Hague Convention, and it doesn't just go towards basic explanations. It ensures further that the lines of communication across the borders with the contracted states or signatory states remains active, and it encourages these very signatories to keep in contact as it relates to that adoption process of that child. Recognition of the articles or the conventions, it gives recognition, and where it is in the force of law, the convention takes precedence except in a situation where that term might directly contravene the Constitution. So, Mr. Speaker, because of international principles and norms that have been enshrined in the Hague Convention, and you have countries who have signed on, it is most natural that each country, instead of arbitrarily doing their own processes, each country will adopt the Hague Convention terms into its laws to give those terms the force of law. So, Mr. Speaker, the Hague Convention, it's not just that Guyana is giving the Hague Convention's terms the force of law, but it is with the paramount consideration of what is best for our children who have the option of being adopted abroad. So with that being said, Mr. Speaker, I wholly support this bill being tabled and being brought into force and legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Minister Parag, Minister of the Public Service. I'll now call on the Honorable Member, Ms. Maureen Philadelphia, to make her contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. and a pleasant good morning to one and all. Mr. Speaker, I rise to make my contribution to Bill number 3 of 2001, Adoption of Children Bill Amendment. I like to say what an opportune time. 2 days ago, we observed 187 years of the emancipation of slavery, the worst crime committed against humanity, of which children were also sold to slavery. I dare remind Mr. Speaker, children at this golden stage are the purest form of life existence and should be treated as such. But Mr. Speaker, before I contribute to this bill, please allow me to say thank you to Honorable Minister Vindya Prasad for recognizing the work of APNU, AFC, coalition government. As my colleague would have mentioned also, the amendment to adoption bill was first brought to this noble house on July 8, 2019 by the Honorable Basil Williams, former Minister of Legal Affairs, Attorney General. But Mr. Speaker, it could not have been supported and or ratified because of the continued boycotting of Parliament by the PPP opposition and their derailing of democracy. This is the type of politics being practiced by the PPP. Mr. Speaker, it is now brought to this House with a minor change to the language to give ownership. What a shame. But notwithstanding, Mr. Speaker, I want to focus my attention to Section 44, the amendment to the Principal Act. Section 44 is the insertion of 44A. This basically says a person who commits a breach of this act is liable to a fine of 500,000 Guyana dollars and 6 months imprisonment. Mr. Speaker, this insertion is riddled with uncertainties. One would have thought that the insertion would seek to address the safeguard of the child on transnational and intertransnational crimes. The Honorable Minister mentioned quite a number of safeguards of which we appreciate and we support, but nonetheless, I remind, like I said before, transnational and intertransnational crime. A child being adopted to a family outside of Guyana does not have the protection of the state, but rather is now under external jurisdiction. Are we saying that these amendments or this amendment will alter the language and its interpretation thereof? Mr. Speaker, I now turn my attention to the Principal Act number 18 of 2009 and its amendment 2011 for the 642B, 3C, and G. Please permit me, Mr. Speaker, to read, and it states, the child's physical, emotional, and educational needs, including the child's sense of personal, family, and cultural identity, is of paramount importance. Further, Mr. Speaker, that if the child is able to form his own views on a matter concerning the child's adoption, the child shall be given an opportunity to express those views freely. And I say freely. And those views are to be given due weight in the circumstances. Moreover, Mr. Speaker, the attitude of each adopter to the child and the responsibility of parenthood is critical. But how do we maintain cultural identity, among other things? I ask. It must be noted, Mr. Speaker, the best interest of the child is what is considered when dealing with adoption. Again, Mr. Speaker, one would have thought that after adopting and signing on to the Hague Convention, some credence would have been given in ensuring the overall well-being and safeguard of the child rather than just insertion 44A. The amendment, therefore, Mr. Speaker, is basically to provide force to the law of the Hague Convention that has already been established and the protection of the children in respect to inter-country adoption. Mr. Speaker, I beg, what mechanism do we have as a state to ascertain these needs are being adequately satisfied when the child has been given over to the contracting state? The American psychologist Abraham Maslow, in his hierarchy of needs, spoke to the basic needs being met in order of priority, which culminate into self-actualization. It is the Secretary of United Nations, Kofi Annan, in his speech, in his quote that says, and I quote, "There is no trust more sacred than one the child holds with children. There is no duty more important than ensuring that their rights and respect, that their welfare is protected, that their lives are free from fear and want, and that they can grow up in peace," unquote. Our most important resources should be treated as such. Therefore, there should be a mission and a commitment to safeguard the welfare of our children after a well-defined vision on their protection and general welfare. But rather, Mr. Speaker, the PPP finds comfort in politicking with the lives of our children of this great land and their welfare. The time has come, and the time is now, for this shameless act to stop. Mr. Speaker, I know my colleagues on the other side will say the provisions are there, but those bottles are open, and if can't, its content can be spilled. So, Mr. Speaker, to avoid spillage, there must be capped bottles. Let me now show you what I speak of. I turn to Article 9 and Article 8. Mr. Speaker, please permit me to read. Article 8 reads, Central authorities shall take directly or through public authorities all appropriate measures to prevent improper financial or other gain in connection with an adoption and to deter all practices contrary to the objectives of the Convention. Article 9. Central authorities shall take directly or through public authorities or other bodies duly accredited in their state all appropriate measures in particular to A. Collect, preserve, and exchange information about the situation of the child and the prospective adoptive parents so far as is necessary to complete the adoption. B. Facilitate, follow, and expedite proceedings with a view to obtaining the adoption. C. Promote the development of adoption, counseling, and post-adoption services in their states. D. Provide each other with general evaluation reports about experiences with intercountry adoption. And E. Reply insofar as is permitted by the law of their state to justified request for other central authorities or public authorities for information about the particular adoption situation. Mr. Speaker, are those really working in the best interest of the child? Carol Bellamy states, and I quote, in serving the best interest of the children, we serve the best interest of all humanity. Unquote. Further, Mr. Speaker, I ask, how do we safeguard our children against human trafficking with interstate country? Mr. Speaker, one would have thought that after more than 2 decades of the PPP rule, they would have revisited our Principal Act so as to provide more immediate benefits for our children. Advancing the cause for the children needs to be treated with the highest form of respect. It should and must be done. Mr. Speaker, I therefore say thank you to the Honorable Minister once again for recognizing the work of the APNU AFC coalition government by bringing this bill for discussion. But I also want to ask for us to revisit the Act and find other ways in providing services to and for our children. I thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Member. Ms. Philadelphia. I now call on the Honorable Attorney General to make his contribution.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to begin by reminding this Honorable House that in our manifesto, we promised that over the next 5 years, once elected, of course, we will undertake a review of Guyana's legislative architecture with a view of not only removing from our existing laws the vestiges of colonialism, the archaic beliefs, customs, and practices that are embedded in our legislation, but also to introduce modern legislation that captures or that coincide with our economic agenda, and also that embrace the liberal ethos to which we aspire as a people. Part of that exercise, Mr. Speaker, will also include invariably bringing our municipal law in conformity with our obligations on the different treaties to which we have signed on as a nation. Only yesterday, Mr. Speaker, His Excellency the President, in his address to the nation, made reference to that legislative agenda. Today, before this House, is a slew of legislation, all designed to achieve that objective to which I have made reference. This bill that is before the House, Mr. Speaker, is part of that slew of legislation. In 1990, in this 9th Parliament of Guyana, Mr. Speaker, we passed a series of what we referred then to as children legislation that completely modernized and revolutionized our legislative architecture in relation to children. This, we have heard a lot about the Hague Convention from my distinguished colleagues on the other side. The Honorable Natasha Lewis spoke very aggressively about our failure as a government to have implemented the convention, and admonished us emphatically for trying to take ownership of what, according to her, is a product of the APNU-AFC government. And she spoke glowingly, the honorable member, about the content of the bill. Then the honorable member Maureen Philadelphia spoke on the same side and pointed to a series of deficiencies in the very bill that Ms. Lewis took ownership of on behalf of the APNU-AFC. So apparently, Mr. Speaker, one speaker is critical of the bill and the other speaker takes ownership of the bill. And they are on the same side. But that is okay, that's acceptable. The truth of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, the Hague Convention was drafted in 1993, but only brought into force in 1995. Sovereign nations are allowed time before they join into conventions and they sign on to conventions. Some conventions require a particular change procedurally and in the infrastructure of the particular sector before you can sign on to them. This bill, this convention is one of them. And I hear an utterance from the deep recesses at the back. And let me assure you that while 99 countries have signed on to this convention, only Haiti and St. Kitts have done so along with Guyana in the Caribbean. So the entire CARICOM region is yet to sign on this convention. We in Guyana had to first remove from our law the entire legislative architecture that was so anachronistic in relation to children legislation before we could have aspired to sign on to this convention. And yes, I concede that it was signed on by the APNU, AFC. Nothing wrong with recognizing that. But as usual, you failed and neglected to complete the process. And that is what we are doing now. And it was not because the PPP absented from Parliament. It is because you were defeated democratically and constitutionally by a no-confidence motion and thrown out of the government. So don't come here and say what PPP boycotted. We voted and you all lost the vote. As a result, you lost your right to sit in the Parliament. So you could not have completed the job that you started. And we are here simply to complete that task. So, Mr. Speaker, we have many, many things to start. And we are going to start and complete all. It will take time. But it would help if you gave constructive help. It will help if you would assist as leaders. Not to pull us down. We are moving at an amazingly fast pace. But everything takes time. So, Mr. Speaker, I first want to begin by recognizing that this bill simply incorporates into our law the parts of the convention that we are mandated to incorporate into our municipal law as a result of signing on to the convention. The United Nations and the UNICEF and all the international organizations that have interest in the protection of all children universally would like to see a common universal code in relation to our children and their adoption. They want harmonization of our laws so that the evils that are out there to which our children are exposed, for example, human smuggling and human trafficking, the world can have a common network to fight against these evils. So there is nothing negative about this bill that is before us today. The Honorable Member Maureen Philadelphia identified what she termed as deficiencies. But to the Honorable Member, I say that those are the convention provisions. And we have an obligation to incorporate them as they appear. Not that I concede that the Honorable Member has accurately identified what the Honorable Member terms as deficiencies. I don't accept that for one moment. But just to assure the Honorable Member that what we are doing here, as her colleague, the Honorable Lewis said, is simply repassing a bill that apparently was tabled since in 2019 with minor clerical changes. So, Mr. Speaker, the bill, first of all, recognizes, and Guyana, by promulgating this bill here today, we are recognizing the principle which is embraced and expressly stated in the preambulatory provisions of our Constitution. Article 38B says, and I quote, "The best interest of the child shall be the primary consideration in all matters concerning children." And more specifically, as it relates to adoption, Article 38C states, and I quote, "The state shall ensure that adoption of a child takes place only if that adoption would be in the best interest of the child." The concatenation of these provisions here are all aggregated to the attainment of these principles which are embraced in our very supreme law. So, Mr. Speaker, it is an absolute obligation not only to anchor in our Constitution, but also in the international human rights law for the best interest of the child to be the deciding factor in relation to adoption. It is an obligation that the government takes, obviously, with the greatest of priority. And to this end, the best interest of the child principle runs through this bill, and it is a cornerstone of our Constitution itself. As I stated earlier, Mr. Speaker, some 99 countries have already signed on this treaty, including the United States of America, United Kingdom, India, Albania, Australia, Belize, Brazil, Canada, Colombia, Costa Rica, Cuba, Denmark, Dominican Republic, Ecuador, Fiji, France, Ireland, Lithuania, Ghana, and Zambia. So, Mr. Speaker, the world is moving in this direction. No doubt the other territories in the CARICOM region will have to come on board. And reference was made about we ceased adoption for a period. Yes, that is so, because in recognition of the fact that our law as it stood then did not accord with the principle that is so deeply rooted in our Constitution. When we passed the 2000 and in the 9th Parliament, we brought our law up to force then. We brought our law up to force then, and we were doing adoption. Adoption never stopped. It's just briefly when we made a commitment to sign on to the Hague Convention that we put a pause on adoption, because the adopting states, they also have an obligation not to adopt children from countries or territories that are not contracting parties. It's a principle based upon reciprocity, which is a fundamental principle of international law and obligation. The convention applies, Mr. Speaker, to all adoptions where a person habitually resident in a convention country wishes to adopt a child who is habitually resident in Guyana. Practically, the adoption process outside the convention is similar. However, the convention provides a framework for the practical application of the principles regarding inter-country adoption contained in the Convention of the Rights of the Child. And that's the point I am making. In our 9th Parliament, that slew of legislation that we enacted then, they were perfectly in accord with international standards at the time. Nothing was wrong with them. We created the Child Protection Agency. We had the Guardianship Act. We had the Adoption Act, and a whole series of bills we passed in this House. And we modernized our architecture then. We are simply improving on that now. And this is an exercise that will be evolving. The world is a dynamic place. The law is a dynamic institution. And for the law to remain relevant, to address the social realities that the laws are intended to address, the law must remain fluid, and we will have to come back here repeatedly to pass laws in order to capture the new aspirations, the new beliefs, the new protective mechanisms that are created internationally. So yes, we are going to come here all the time. All these bills that are before us are in the same genus. They are to improve our architecture, to modernize our architecture. The convention gives effect to Article 21 of the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child by adding substantive safeguards and procedures to the broad principles and norms laid down in the Convention of the Rights of the Child. Article 21 of the CRC provides that state parties that recognize and or permit the system of adoption shall ensure that the best interest of the child shall be the paramount consideration. We have done even better than this. We have ensconced this very principle in our most supreme law when we amended our Constitution in the 1999 and 2001 period. And that is why I always say that our Constitution, the 2001 Constitution, is ahead of the Caribbean by far. And I can prove that and argue that at any forum. I now move on, Mr. Speaker, to highlight some important features of the bill as well as the convention. Firstly, there is greater security safeguards to protect children from abduction, sale, and trafficking. And I made this point earlier. And I would ask my distinguished sister, Maureen Philadelphia, to listen very carefully. Facilitating adoption only through central authorities or those authorized by central authorities ensures greater security, predictability, and transparency in international adoptions. Accordingly, the adoptions arranged between the prospective adoptive parents and the biological parents are not inconsistent with the convention. Additionally, due to rigorous procedures for adoption and additional controls provided by the conventions, families and children are protected from adoption and trafficking of persons. And what we are implementing here in our law, importantly, is reciprocated in every convention territory. And that is the importance of incorporating this in our legislation. So we can pick up the phone and speak immediately to the United States of America, if that is the adopting country, and get on to a similar structure, a similar statutory officer, or a similar agency to that which exists in Guyana with similar responsibilities to make the inquiries that Madam Philadelphia is so worried about. To this end, the new section 35C provides that the minister shall by order establish the central authority or designate an entity to carry out the functions of the central authority. The new section 35D provides that a person can only adopt a child in Guyana by applying to the central authority in their country. Once this is done, the central authority will send the application to the central authority in Guyana for processing. The already established adoption procedures for assessing an adoption under Part 3 of the Adoption Act will be utilized to process all Hague adoptions. My distinguished sister, the Minister of Human Services, spoke about that amendment. That amendment is intended to reserve in the minister's discretion, the subject minister, over children in Guyana, the discretion to appoint a suitably qualified group of persons who will act as the central authority in Guyana. Currently, our structure provides that the Child Care Protection Agency is the apex of that hierarchical structure in relation to our children's rights and obligations. However, the Hague Convention prescribes a higher authority, since the Child Protection Agency itself is part of the process and part of the organs that will require the scrutiny of the central authority. So there is a higher bureaucratic structure that the minister now has the power to create, and hopefully that will be created in short time. Part 3 of the Adoption Act sets out the role of the court. Who can adopt? Who can be adopted, and the need for consent of certain persons, including the parents of the child and guardian of the child. Our law and legal systems, as my learned friend Mr. Ramjatan will tell you, resides a special power in our High Court. The High Court is regarded as the guardian of our children. That is why in our system, the courts play, the High Court plays a significant role. It is the High Court that assesses the character, the credibility, and examines the circumstances surrounding the adoption of a child, considers the suitability of adopting parents. Is the judge or judges of the High Court that has that power to adjudge and adjudicate upon the suitability of adopting parents, their records, etc. And that's an important safeguard that this bill retains in our law. The convention recognizes and preserves the principle of subsidiary by requiring that inter-country adoption should only take place after national solutions have been considered. Therefore, consideration should first be given to placing a child with his or her birth family, extended family, or family in their country of origin. Where suitable family cannot be found for the child in the care in the child's state of origin, only then inter-country adoption is allowed. This is an important concept that is being safeguarded, and that is why so much emphasis I have placed on the principle of what is in the best interest of the child. This convention and these amendments emphasizes that principle. Adoption is not of first resort. It is not what an adopting parent wants. It is what is in the best interest of the child. And that is why a judge is empowered to oversee this entire process, to ensure that that constitutional doctrine of according the best interest of the child is accorded the highest priority. Because if the child can enjoy better life, a better future in the country where the child is, or in a different family other than the adoptive family, then that adoption in the home country, then that adoption will not go through or ought not to go through. And these are the important protective mechanisms that this bill provides for the protection of our children. As inter-country adoption transcends borders, there is a risk of transnational crimes with children as victims occurring. This convention supports the protection of our children from these crimes by requiring each state to put safeguards in place to prevent the harm and exploitation of our children. That is why lawmaking can never be an act in isolation. Lawmaking, if we are to achieve the purpose of why the law was conceived, to regulate human affairs for the best interest of the human being, then these laws have to be interconnected. And that is why we have a new trafficking bill that will be brought to the Parliament that has in it several provisions that will go hand in hand with the provisions here against transnational smuggling. And you will see our government engage in several acts of preventing that from taking place in our country currently. There's a lot of people smuggling that we are speaking about, and we are taking drastic measures to guard against them. This convention speak about that. Many times we have issued statements and we have made public the issue of children being what we believe to be are trafficked through our borders. This bill, and I use this opportunity to highlight that for your attention, that the world is frowning upon that, and countries across the globe are implementing statutory and other protective mechanisms to guard against transnational crimes, with children being a victim in particular. Automatic recognition was introduced by the convention to provide certainty to the status of the child and remove the need for recognition orders or readoption. This is reflected in this bill. New section 35F provides for automatic recognition of adoptions certified by another central authority. New 35G provides that an adoption certificate issued by a convention country is evident that the adoption to which the certificate or order relates was agreed to by the central authorities for both countries, and that it was carried out in accordance with the convention and law of the country that issues the adoption certificate. Here we are bringing consistency and uniformity in the process, so that many times lawyers who are in this house would have confronted situations where you get an order of court from Guyana, or you get an order from the protection agency, the child protection agency. But when the child is taken to the country to which the child is adopted, you have a difficulty in institutions in that country recognizing this certificate as authentic. And sometimes lawyers have had to go back to the court to get the Chief Justice or get some high official to write in order to authenticate the documents that are being doubted or rendered dubious in another country. This bill and this convention removes that and makes it all the instruments recognized by the mutual agencies or corresponding agencies that are involved in the adoption process. And it also, and that is why there's another bill that will come here that we will debate later, where you will see a provision that allows for when an adoption is done, for a certificate to be issued that is not dissimilar, a birth certificate, for example, that is not dissimilar to the ordinary birth certificate. And that is to ensure that we remove completely all discriminations from our children. Adopted children, children born out of wedlock, or children born in wedlock are treated in our Constitution and under our legal system as equal. And we have a duty in this Parliament to remove whatever shackles of inequalities and discriminatory remnants that still exist in our law. In the other bill that I will be speaking about later, and we will be debating, you will hear me speak about that as well. To further enhance compliance with the Adoption Act, Clause 3 of the bill inserts a new 44A. This section provides a general penalty for anyone who breaches any of the provisions of the Act where no penalty is provided. The general penalty is a summary conviction of $500,000 and imprisonment for 6 months. So here it is, where any breach of any provision of the law is committed, and the section itself that is breached doesn't create an offense, then there is an omnibus provision that will kick in, and a person who acts in contravention of that law or aids and abets the contravention of that law will be liable to be charged. So there is great enforceability here, and I want to commend that to my sister who spoke, Madam Philadelphia. In conclusion, as a government, it's our responsibility to enable the protection of children so that their full potential is realized. This requires us to have the requisite policy, and pass the necessary legislation to ensure that their fundamental rights and freedoms are respected. This is what this bill does. It recognizes the right of the child to have a family and at the same time protects children from abuse and exploitation. The well-being of our children remains a key concern for this government, as children, due to their vulnerabilities, require our special attention. This bill symbolizes another concrete commitment of this government to protect, fulfill, and respect the rights of our children. I have no difficulty in commending this bill to this Honorable House. I thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable Attorney General. Honorable members, this is a good time to take the lunch break.
But when outside faces from foreign places talk about taking over, we ain't backing